It's been 2.5 years since The Will of the Many hit shelves, and for a lot of people, it became one of the defining sci-fi fantasy books of 2023. Something about the Roman-inspired nature of the book, combined with the Academy settings, combined with the really over-the-top cast of characters, solidified it as a lot of people's favorite book for the year and of the last little while. James Islington came out and showed that he could really follow up on sort of the ground that he had laid with the Lycanius trilogy. And I think for a lot of people, even producing a better book. Now, here at the end of 2025, The Strength of the Few is out, and I read this book in 2 days, okay? 2 days. It has been basically nothing but me reading over the last little while, and there is a damn good reason for it. And that's because, well, this is a spoiler. You've clicked on this video, you saw the thumbnail, you read the title. This is going to be a spoiler-filled video. I really enjoyed this book even more than I did The Will of the Many. I thought this was a step up basically across the board, which, looking at some reviews of this book, is apparently controversial. And I don't know why, team. I don't know why. I'm seeing a lot of people who I don't think, it sounds mean, I don't think they read hard enough. I think they missed things. I think they weren't paying attention. I don't know. We're going to do it. This is going to be a full in-depth spoiler discussion, talking about all the sort of minutia stuff I think folks might have missed, and then talking about my fan theories about where I think this story can go. So this isn't like, oh, I've read book one, curious about, go read the book. It's good. You should read it. You should enjoy it. I guess I'll start minory, a little bit less spoilery off the bat, but like, don't watch this video if you haven't read the book. All right, we're going to talk about all of it. I have pages of notes, so if you see me looking in front of me, it's because I've got just so many notes. So we're going to be going, hopefully I don't miss anything as we go through this. So yeah, let's jump into this. Of course, if you enjoy this kind of content, if you enjoy, I do some spoiler-free reviews too, but if you like these big, in-depth, deep dive, these sort of fan theory discussions, be sure to hit like and subscribe. I've been on just the absolute biggest, like, Roman-inspired, I'm going to put all the thumbnails on the screen. It's just so many of them these days. So if you are interested in like Red Rising or Sun Eater or any of that kind of stuff, I have reviews for those in the channel as well. But let's jump back into it. Let's start off with the obvious elephant of the room. Baby, we got 3 POVs. Kind of. We have kind of 3 POVs. We have 3 POVs. This has been split in 3. We have 3 different worlds, 3 different cultures, 3 different perspectives on the same character. Ooh, which is just so exciting to me because, when we talk about in psychology, the idea of nature versus nurture. We talk about if you take 2 identical twins, and the studies have been done on this. If you raise 2 identical twins, if you separate them at birth, they end up generally taking very similar life paths, more similar life paths than they would if you kept them together. And I think this is very interesting when you take this at the end of book 1, you split him into 3, you put him into 3 very different situations, and seeing how you have this character change and evolve over time. And we're going to get into it, obviously. And sort of the intricacies of the 3 worlds, the different magic systems, the way wills apply, the different cultural elements, but just sort of to start, just off the rip. I love the idea, a really fresh and unique take of taking a single POV book and breaking into multi-POV. Because it's still the same character we know and love. It's still the same background. It's still the same tragic backstory. It's still the same rise. And then continuing to see that when presented with these different options and opportunities, when we look at like Lucaeum, when we look at Obidium, Obitium. I mean, oh yeah, side note, I went in the back, I looked at the glossary, I tried to get the correct pronunciation. I don't think I pronounced a single word right in this whole damn book, okay? So forgive me if A, I'm pronouncing it wrong, and B, I mess it up consistently over the course of this. But yes, this is really where this book starts, following this on his 3 somewhat different adventures, some with more or less impetus towards them. I sort of debated with sort of where I wanted to start this, but I think it makes sense to start this in media res. No, it's a joke for the authors in the crowd. No, starting back on res, starting on the main world that we know, with Catan and the Empire and the hierarchy and all that kind of stuff. Starting with him sort of coming back out. He's obviously been injured. He's lost his arm, and realizing that the politics and the machinations potentially go even deeper than he first realizes. Obviously, he knows that the Anguis have been conspiring. There's the attack. There's the potential betrayal from Emissa. There's all these different things that he's sort of dealing with and sort of juggling. But then the big one that sort of leaps out is obviously the fact that he, quote unquote, defected. The fact that he went over to governance, that he's now working with Calidus's father to try and figure out what the heck happened, what the heck was going on, how did this all occur. And that's really his driving impetus behind all of this. And if you can hear people deciding to leaf blow outside my window as I record this video, I apologize in advance. I'll try and knock this out as we go through it. But it really does follow, his wanting to dive deeper into the layers of the hierarchy's society. It's always something he's wanted to do. It sort of really aligns with everything that he's done after the death of his parents, him having to pretend not to be a Prince of Seuss. And it really feels like a straightforward continuation of his story. He still has to be assessed. He still has to go through all these things. This really feels, kind of as it should, I guess, like the most mainline continuation of book one. And looking at other people's comments on this, looking at other people's reviews, that feels like the biggest gripe people have with this book, is that this book isn't just more of that. That's wrong. This book was never going to be more of that. This book was so obviously not just like a Roman-inspired academy setting. No, like this book, like I don't even think the majority of book one took place at the academy, as a side note, but like it was so obviously more about this bigger world. It was so obviously more about the politics. It was so obviously more about these other things that I think people griping over the fact that I just want my Roman bits and I just want, really? Like, I feel like you missed something fundamental in book number one if that's your biggest gripe and takeaway. There's only so much you can do with this set of characters, with this especially, in this academy setting. It was never really going to be more of this. That being said, we did continue to have it. And then we swap over to Lyceum, to Obiteum. And there we get to see this in two very different scenarios, and what I love, even with two different names as the characters evolve. In Lyceum, we see him sort of dropped into this world, which people are attributing to being Viking. I just want to specify, it's not really. These words are Irish. Like, they're actually Irish. Like, just directly Irish. I think in some cases. Like, I don't even think this is like an Old English, like, translation-y thing. I imagine this is more Anglo-Saxon inspired. And we think about, yes, they were, people from Scandinavian cultures, the Vikings, whatever, coming over and raiding in the 700s into Ireland and sort of that cultural significance. But when we talk about, like, the blue tattoos and all this other kind of stuff, I think of, like Celtic's not the right word, but like of that era. But it is Irish culture, traditional Irish culture. So just for people who are aware, they're not Vikings. This isn't Scandinavian. It's like, I almost kind of think this is like meant to be, like it's England, basically. Anyway, travel between worlds works weird. We'll talk more about that. And sort of seeing him put into a scenario where obviously the druids are there. They're sort of this overarching force. They control and manipulate will. And there's clearly a lot going on with the background of this world. And this version of this doesn't end up being crazy curious about it, which is probably one of my biggest gripes about this book. Because while I do enjoy a ton about this book, I do have some small gripes, but we'll come back to that in a bit. And he's sort of thrust into this world. He's sort of picked up. He's a prisoner. He's going to be brought, before this leader. He's supposed to learn more, and gets thrust into a situation where he basically gets put on his ass, for lack of a better term. And I think the pacing in this book is a masterclass. We'll talk more about that. But I can see, for some people, potentially, this is where they could have a little bit of annoyance with the pacing, but I don't think so. I think this is incredibly strategically done. I think this is important. The idea that we have a version of him that gets to experience peace. A version of him that gets to sit back on a farm with a family who cares about him and gets to experience a quiet and simple life. That is so very cool to me, because so much of his life, obviously, he had, obviously this idyllic childhood, but the last 5 years was not that at all. And all of his was forward and revenge and pain and war. And that's sort of, I think, all he envisioned for himself. So to see something that's not, and it's different, and to get a taste of what could be otherwise, I think is very, very interesting to the character. Because, of course, you could not further contrast this very aimless version of himself versus the one that shows up in Obiteum. The one that is instantly met by Siror, which I have not been pronouncing at all correctly, I discovered, looking in the back of the book. But meeting, obviously, the brother that he's been, whose death he's pseudo been trying to avenge this whole time, trying to learn more. And, of course, he's obviously not dead in this version, this world as it is. And then it's this very, like, we have a task, we have a mission. It's almost like a pseudo heist story. We've got to kill God. And it's like, oh, classic, gotta kill God scenario. Let's go. We love a classic, you gotta kill God. I mean, great. This is awesome. And then, of course, you have this very, like, beautiful rolling green hills and the meadows and the rain and all this, stuff, this idyllic countryside, contrasted with post-apocalyptic Egypt. And it is post-apocalyptic. Like it is, again, it is Egypt, which is so interesting. And you sort of have these three different iterations of it, and to see these different cultures merge and mesh. For someone who grew up playing Age of Mythology, it's kind of felt like a fun little nod to that. And seeing, I have to say, I got to give Islington so many props. I loved all three of these POVs almost perfectly equally. Like, to me, it was almost perfectly equidistant in how much I enjoyed all of them, which is rare, which is uncommon, I will say, for me to really enjoy, going back. And there's some POVs you prefer more than others. I really liked all three of these. And again, for the people who like, I only want the Roman stuff, I guess I could see that being annoying, but like, these are three cool worlds. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot to learn. So to go through that, I thought was really, really interesting. And to have him be so hyper-focused, so intent, so knowing, wow, if I do this, I can stop a cataclysm. This is incredible. And having this very, very clear, hyper-defined path forward, the training montages and all this stuff. And again, to contrast that with a character who is not living aimlessly, but is living peacefully. And again, I got to give the props. The atmosphere of this dry, barren world where every bit of water is toxic and there's like no food, and the Walking Dead, like zombies are everywhere. And like, that's cool. That's like, every time I came back to it, I kind of, my heart tensed a little bit because it was painted so well. This like horrible green, like LED light that's just so unnatural. No part of it felt natural. Like something broke this world. And obviously part of the mystery and part of what I'll talk about and theorize again is obviously, we'll talk about more as the course of this video goes on, because Oboteum is lost. Ooh, what does that mean? So again, we have sort of, again, these three sort of main characters. You sort of have the proto-Vis, back in Res, who's, again, still trying to find out more about the specifics of the politicking. Obviously, we have the different factions really about to get into it, potentially about to have a civil war. And then these two, significantly contrasting stories. Now, the one thing that really, connects them, of course, is that Vis decides to embrace using will. And this was a really interesting thing. And something I actually gave Islington a lot of props for in the first book is that he didn't have that over the top anime level up moment where he decides, oh, I can use will now, or, oh, I will use will. And I go forward and I level up and I save the day. Nope, he doesn't do that. He gets stabbed and falls off a tower and almost dies. Basically should have died if he hadn't had the connections between the people getting healed in the other worlds, as we learn. And of course, in this book, though, that has to go out the window because you have to have somewhere you can go. So as much as I think basically all three versions of this kind of leaned into using will way too easily, I do get why you had to do it from a story perspective. I do wish there had been a little bit more of a, oh my God, I hate this. And you have a little bit of that when you see sort of the Res Vis moving forward, and you have that whole moment with Lannistia. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, I think that sort of decision there was the right call. And then, of course, we get the payoff of him being in school for all these years and realizing that, yeah, he does actually know what he's doing, but he is, naturally inclined. And then we have the fact that he's synchronous. All these extra options and abilities come in. So again, it was cool to have that moment of him finally being tested, of him competing against everyone else, of him still being able to be this over the top, that very much felt like the nod and the wink to those who are big fans of book number 1. And of course, you get like a classic Ben-Hur style chariot race. Who doesn't love that? Come on. I grew up watching the movie with my dad, so great. Love that. And again, I thought that was sort of the last nod to that sort of classic element of book 1 before we fully go into the fact that this is like a pseudo space opera. Like this is a high fantasy book across multiple war. Like that was sort of the last nod to the academy elements of book number 1, and where we move, I think, more away from this being a YA book, because the back half of this book is very dark. It's very gruesome. It's very gritty. Like it's still technically YA or maybe new adult because of Vis's age, but we definitely move in more of that direction heading into the back half of the book. And I say starting to wave goodbye to more of those YA elements that we experienced in both book 1 and also the first part of this book. But like I said, learning about these three different sort of elements of the magic system with will, obviously the idea of sort of kinetic motion and empowerment, endowment being the main element of sort of Res. Obviously we have Oboteum. It's all about reviving the dead and sort of all about sort of health and vitality and that sort of element. And then in Lucaeum, it's different. It's really not explained as much, but sort of how I interpreted it was sort of like ancestral magic and sort of the idea of will being imbued over time, or even like more than will, but almost like your mind being imbued more, whether that's in a place or an item. Obviously, the objects were huge, and the idea that these things are empowered by ancestral will, which then makes me really, really interested to see what a world like that would look like all put back together. Because think about that. When you have people who have will is just like a part of life and death, and it's all put together. The idea that that people can both die and be reborn, but then maybe also imbue their consciousness into an item or into, how does that work when those two elements are combined? How does the will of Lucaeum and Obatium, how do those work together? That's weird as heck. So that makes me very curious to see how sort of that's going to go, because like I said before, will is a really, really big, and then utilization of it's a massive part of this book. And I'm glad we finally got to have a fantasy book where we're constantly told about a magic system, I actually get to see the bloody magic system. Yay, it's about time. I am glad we did get there. I do wish there was a little more trepidation, but of course, things happen when he goes to seed his will. We do obviously have Lannistia sort of have this pseudo attempt to assassinate him, and then he kind of just gets out of it. Anybody else notice that? How he was supposed to seed his will, and then it didn't work, and then they're like, oh, try again, and then obviously all hell breaks loose, and then he just never has to again? Wasn't that his whole gripe? Like, I don't want to use will, but I don't want to cede my will to anybody either. That's why he has those scars on his back. And then nobody just like checks? Is that weird? Is that a plot hole? Like, I'm sorry. Like, I do really like this book. Like, this is basically, it's almost a 5-star book for me, but like, what the heck? That was weird. Why did I miss it? Did I miss them addressing it? Did I skip a paragraph or something? I don't think, but maybe. Let me know in the comments. Did I miss why it was never really brought up again? Because I don't think he can seed will because he's synchronized. I don't know if he can. So anyway, yeah. Very, very interesting. Because obviously that main world in Res, they're the ones we know about the most. Aqua, Aiden, all that kind of stuff, Aiden. And, I think that's really one of those situations where the found family element comes into play and sort of sets the tone for the other ones. Because obviously we do have a little bit of that, or quite a bit of that, between the other worlds as well. But I think giving Vis that cast of characters around him really, really did a lot. And I wish they were fleshed out a little bit more. I'm glad we got a little bit more of Aiden's backstory through his father, but I still wish that, Aqua still felt pretty two-dimensional to me, or one-dimensional to me in this case. Like, she really didn't feel super, super deep. The fact that sort of Emissa was pushed off as a love interest was fine. I overall sort of, I liked the character elements across all three of these, okay, but to me this wasn't really about what made this story great. This really was the stakes, the setting, and the action and the pacing was what really made it. Like, every single time you swap from POV to the next, like every single POV swap almost felt like a cliffhanger. Like, you want almost to compare it to Brandon Sanderson, and we can do that. To compare it a little bit there, like the idea of once you get into the Sanderlanche, you're really in that territory. Like, I really enjoyed all these POVs basically equally, because I was never really mad to get ripped out of it, because you're leaving one thing and you're coming back to another one, like, oh wait, crap, we were in the middle of this. And so every single thing had to have that, like, oh no, POV swap moment, but then you're like, wait, but this, and it was always this sort of fun little jump every single time. And again, I saw people complaining about how, oh, you made me learn all these different worlds, you made me keep track of all these different skill issue. I don't know what to tell you guys. I don't know. I didn't think it was that hard to keep track, and I was always basically excited to get back to it. So I don't know. I really enjoyed it. So again, from sort of the start to finish of these books, I loved the pseudo POV swapping. I loved the sort of much bigger exposition into learning the magic system, and I love the pacing of this book. I thought it was phenomenal. I love that there were still impactful character deaths. I love that there were still big stakes across the board. Again, my one sort of gripe, I think, from like a pure plot perspective, was the fact that the Vis and Lucaeum just kind of like forgot why he was there. We're first supposed to find out what's going on in the world, and he thinks he's transported somewhere else on the same planet for most of it. So like, bud, you could like trying to figure out how to get back maybe, but then he like doesn't, and he just like doesn't care. I love that he had this glimpse of this idyllic life, but the fact that he was so willing to drop everything so quickly, I don't know. And maybe again, that has to do with the idea that they're not exact perfect clones. There's still some element of the world that is imprinted on them. The one in Obatium is hardened. He's ready to kill. He's willing to dive in acid water for hours to get to versus the one who's a little more relaxed and is comfortable living on the farm. I don't know how much of the world is sort of impacting them, but again, I digress. So yeah, so we have some fun little things. Again, I'm really out of whack with my notes now, but we're going to keep going. Oh yes, we did talk about this a little bit. I had a really nice transition built in here. Anyway, we didn't make it. The idea of again, these characters sort of coming together at the end. The idea of Anestia and finding his adopted father, and then leaving Relucia on the sapper. Were the coldest move I think we've ever seen Vis make. Just incredible, just ridiculous. Harsh, man. I don't know if that was deserved. Ooh, and that's again seeing his character. Vis in book 1 would never have done that. Now to see people dead, to see that Aqua just killed. Very, very interesting. And then of course we talk more about the Anguists. They're slightly more backseat in this, but still really prevalent in Ostius, who is a very interesting character and one I definitely want to talk about more. So we obviously get a glimpse of him in book 1. We think he can move with super speed. In reality, we know he's actually jumping between worlds. We learn that he's able to sort of portal into one, move around, and jump back in. But what's interesting again is they're sort of shown at different heights and different levels, yet they are the same place. But it doesn't put. Again, very interesting how they're sort of, it is the same world, just literally like slightly shifted dimensionally, which is very, very cool. Which again, this goes to show how much they actually have to travel to probably get to what is actually Egypt in Obitium. So again, very interesting. But what's cool, and I was curious because I want to look this up. The root of the word ostia actually means like mouth or portal or door. And for a person who can jump between worlds, that feels very, very interesting to me. And again, there's the moment where they help facilitate the coup and the civil war. That is very, very interesting to me. And I have some ideas about that, which we'll touch on more when I sort of get into like my full on fan theory section of all of this. But yeah, again, this covered so many different cool arcs and elements, learning, this dumb bit about learning to be a dancer, sure, but like the integration of that society in the East and West and the division there all the way across to sort of, again, another sort of pseudo training arc of learning to be a warrior on the other side. And I wish they touched in more of the bardic elements of that, but again, I digress. And then again, the whole idea of the coup and the civil war and the Anguists again, all combining. This book did a really good job of, again, it was 3 really distinct stories in one, but they were all connected, and how they're all going to come back together is, I think, going to be make or break for the series, because nothing was perfect. Again, I love the pacing. I love the overall concepts. I love the world. There were small things, again, across the board that I thought weren't perfect, but like, that's okay. Because when you put them all together, when you sort of, lump it all in, it leaves me asking so many questions. So let's talk about some of my questions. Let's talk about where I think this is going to go. Because the obvious one, the big one, the biggest of elephants in the room is the classic trope of we go and kill the big bad evil emperor who has been ruling the world for 1,000 years. Oh, wait. Oh, no. It turns out he's actually holding back a bigger evil. Crazy. Who would have seen that? Maybe, yeah, kind of obviously. A bit on the nose. The whole maybe a mistake of sort of putting the concurrence and Ka together, which again, the origin of that word too, from an Egyptian standpoint, and animus and spirit, all very interesting. But again, I'm not sure. I'm not sure Ka is unsynchronized even. I think there's a lot of different ways that this could go. First and foremost, I do probably think that yes, the concurrence, the truth of the fact that it is some giant AI machine across worlds built using the circuitry of human minds, and that is actually the big bad. I think there's a chance that that's true. I think that's probably more than likely true. I don't think that that's what's being misconstrued or lied about in this case. Is Ka desynchronized across all? Has he been actually killed in Obitium? I don't know. I'm not sure, because it was not easy, and it was a whole book of not being easy. But at the end, I think it was too easy. I don't know if that was him. I'm not 100% convinced. We don't see any follow-up. We don't see the aftermath, other than him telling you in Res that he's done goofed and I can't do this anymore and it has to be you now, this. I don't know. Because there is a big old Chekhov's gun that we did not see addressed in the form of a giant golden sarcophagus in like coolant water, in also deadly water. I don't know. There's something there. Is that actually Ka's real body? Is it there, funnily enough, sort of in the crypts? Or is that actually the mind of the concurrence? Which I hope I'm remembering and saying correctly, because I realized I forgot to write that down in my notes. Believe it is. Is that actually like the cooled brain of the supercomputer? I'm not sure. Is this all actually a bait and actually a trap, and maybe it is all the same thing? I don't think so. I think there was actually a person, or there is a person who's been trying to, they believe, hold back something, the idea that as more will is seeded across all three worlds, and again, as we see these massive obelisks glowing and powering up as more is created, you have to knock down the population a bit in order to stop something bigger and evil, more evil from coming online and booting up. I'm guessing that's what it is. I'm guessing that's why we have to have these mass cullings, these cataclysms. But I'm not 100% sure. That would be my guess. Again, it's suspicious. It's suspicious. There's also another character in Res who I think I'm going to go on a guess. I think we've met Ka. I think we actually have met their real body and not an Eonctus in Res. I want to learn more about this Caster person, this Quester person, the one who administered the test to Viz when he went down and had his blood test and everything. Having a mononym, a title, just one, no Sextus or, Octavius or whatever, like, interesting. This old guy who seems to have incredible knowledge, who has photographs of other worlds. Interesting. Yeah, I'm curious about that. And then I'm curious if we've met this person as well in Lucaeum, because obviously at the end of the book, after all this, the war ends and we realize who we're actually been fighting against this whole time. So we have Siroor on one side, who's our amazing, friendly mentor, and then who is the bad guy that we're fighting against on the other side. And Vis, in his two various forms, in his various names, fighting with and against that character. Oh, very cool. Very cool. Kind of expected, I think. I think it was I think you were sort of maybe meant to believe that Ka was the character, and then actually it's Siroor. So I thought that was a fun little usurping of that potential trope there. But yeah, interesting. Again, I'm not 100% sure where this is going to go, because obviously we have the system boot up situation at the end, and family comes back, and we meet an old friend that maybe some people were expecting to see again. I wasn't sure, because of course, big spoiler, if you didn't figure it out, obviously Calidus is back at the end of this book. Hail Vis, we know who that is. It's obviously Calidus is back. They preserved his body, kept him in here, and is going to be a returning character. So that is interesting, because I had a perception of I don't know, because we obviously had another interesting character throughout this, pseudo character, one on four legs. We had an Alupi through all this, our Lupin friend, Diago, who I don't know. Obviously, what the heck is he actually? Is this just how these animals are, or is there something more here? I think there's something more here. Ostius thinks there's something more here. I thought maybe somehow did like Calidus's mind get like imprinted into it somehow? I don't know. I don't actually think that's the case. And obviously we see him at the end, so I don't think that would work. But something is going on with this animal. Did somehow this imprint a version of himself or Diego, the person he was, maybe, into this? People are thinking about maybe it is actually an Eonctus, that maybe it was actually dead as a puppy, and that this actually somehow maybe brought it back as an Eonctus, but it still grew and still lived. Because one thing I think is interesting is, obviously there's no time travel element to this. It's happening at the same time. But the idea of synchronicity, and the idea that Vis has always kind of seemed to be more than he should be. There's maybe always been a little bit more to this character. I'm wondering if some element of synchronicity does transcend time, and that maybe Vis, in some way, shape, and form, has actually been synchronous his whole life. And maybe through the combination of this ancestral magic we see in Lucaeum and the revitalization magic that we see in Oboteum is actually put together somehow to present either an ancestor or a version of himself, that version of Diego, something, into this animal. And that's why it is so knowledgeable about what it needs to do. It knows how to scout. It knows when to go kill, and knows when to not do so. It is, and maybe why it is so against any form of will usage because it has its own. It's already basically using will. Is this a function of the animals themselves? I don't think so. I think there's something special going on here. And the fact that Ostius calls it out as well would suggest to me that that's the case. So yeah, again, so many different applications, so many things we still don't understand, so many things that were told to us, which is great. So many things paid off, and then still so much left open. The idea that are we going to ally with this supposedly evil overlord who's been here for thousands of years, who's orchestrated cataclysm after cataclysm? Is that actually better than some sort of potentially full wipeout by some sentient AI thing? We don't know. And I'm not 100% convinced that Ka's all telling the truth. I'm not 100% convinced that that's the case here. I think that he doesn't want to do this anymore. I think that he probably still is synchronous and is trying to trick Vis into taking the wheels because for maybe a bunch of reasons, but I think he still can and is choosing not to. I think that's going to be a big reveal coming in. I'm not 100% convinced that that's the case. I think he's tired of bloody doing this or something else. He needs another one. And this has all actually been a plot to get somebody else in to become synchronous, the right person to come in and do this. So yeah, we'll see. Again, you've been made to think that wins in some places and losses in others, and that he's made some horrible mistake. But I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. All I know is that I really enjoyed this book. I thought that every single time we swapped POVs, I was always curious about what was going to come next. I thought that the downtime and the character building was good and good enough to make me care about these individual worlds that felt flushed out, that I'm glad we weren't spoon-fed. Yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I'm really curious to see where this goes. And the last time I sort of enjoyed the lore in a story of a world like this was James Islington Corey with the Captain's War. I thought about that when I read live. I thought about that for days, for weeks, thinking about the different possibilities. I think this is gonna be a book that does the same thing for me. So yeah, again, if you enjoyed this video, if you like these absolutely long pseudo rambling reviews where my camera keeps turning off because it overheats all the time and I have to constantly restart great stuff, yeah, be sure to like and subscribe. Again, we'll be doing more of this kind of stuff. Still more Red Rising, still more Sun Eater to come on the channel. I'm slowly working my way through those books. So if you like that Roman inspired aesthetic, if that's really your jam, you'll find a lot more of that here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Cheers.